And I think one of the things that I feel, especially from the Mainframe project, is the kind of welcoming atmosphere that I've had from the team. There's so many different projects and there's so many different acronyms and ways of working that these guys have been really fundamental in helping, and Joe and some of the others in the room, helping me orientate towards how the world works. And actually something that is quite linked back to Jason is when I joined IBM, I worked in distributed systems. I had no idea what the mainframe was. I just knew it was a black box in Hersley somewhere. And actually, one of the things that I wanted to do today was just try to understand a little bit more about the people we have here, what they do, how they work, and some of the kind of war stories that we have working with the group that we have today. So, Donna, let me pass to you. Let me introduce yourself, and tell me a little bit about kind of how you've worked in distributed systems before, how you've been introduced to the mainframe, and tell me a little about yourself.
That's a scary proposition. So is the microphone. So anybody that knows me at all knows that I spent the majority of my career actually as a developer in the distributed world, which I like to call the dark side. Very specifically in the financial industry in Chicago, which could not be more of an old boys club. It could be different today, but back then as a woman, it was actually really hard to kind of break into that and have anybody take you seriously. And when I think back about some of the war stories that I have from those days, and back then I didn't even know the mainframe existed. Even though I was in the financial industry, I was on the buy side of the street. And the buy side of the street doesn't employ the mainframe, it's the sell side of the street that does. I was this close to it, but I didn't know I was. But I suffered through a lot of, indignations, if you will. I remember one time having a manager who I thought I really respected until one time he sat me down and told me my performance review that I was so overly ambitious that I was intimidating to the others around me. Okay, so seriously, little old me is intimidating. Okay. I'm pretty sure if my name was Len Santalucia, they probably would not have said it to me. Okay? They probably wouldn't have said that to me, right? And so I can go on and on and on about all those kinds of stories, but in the end, it occurs to me that what happened back then and what still happens today is that we all tend to look at each other and we see each other's differences, but what we do is we actually write a narrative in our head. As soon as we see someone and they're different, right? This gentleman over here is wearing dark sunglasses. I've written a story in my head already about him and why he has those dark glasses on. It could be a positive one, it could be a negative one. Most of the time it's negative, it's not negative.
Nerve problem.
But what I'm saying is that most times we tend to write those narratives in our head very quickly, and they tend to be negative. We look at people's differences and we write this negative narrative in our head. A silly example about that is if I were to take this jacket off, you'd see I have tattoos going all up and down both of my arms. They're just flowers. I like flowers. There's nothing offensive about them. However, if I'm out and about and I don't have my arms covered up, you would be amazed at the amount of dirty looks I get, the disgusting looks I get from both men and women, because within 5 seconds of seeing me, they've written a narrative in their head about who I am, what kind of person I am, and therefore what I'm worthy of or maybe not worthy of. And I've actually had people literally ignore me and act like I'm not in the room simply because I look differently. And I have to think back to my time in the distributed world, the way I was treated back then, and think, wasn't the same thing going on back then? They'd written a narrative about me. They'd written this narrative that I was different from them, therefore I wasn't worthy to be in their world. So no matter how much I tried to prove myself, my skills were never the problem. It was that I was different. Now, about 9 years ago, I crossed over to the other side. I came to the mainframe world. 5 years ago, Open Mainframe Project, I got involved in that. And I can tell you that when I crossed over, I was startled at the sense of community and the sense of welcoming that I experienced. From day one, I was embraced, and sometimes literally, by everybody around me. It's not been perfect. I mean, I deal with people all day long, inside and outside my organization. You always get that one person who says, you know, who doesn't think I'm smart enough, they don't think I'm technical enough, or whatever. They just don't think that you know, I'm the right person. They've written the narrative in their head already, right? But for the most part, I'm actually surrounded by some really brilliant people who, by the way, have the patience of saints because they tolerate me and they tolerate the way I learn and they make sure that I get what I need in the way that I need it because I learn differently than everyone else does. We all do. And so I think that's amazing and it's been very different. But I have to wonder what it would be like if I didn't have to feel so fortunate, right? What if that was just commonplace that you get treated that way, right? I think we're getting there, but we're not all the way there yet. And so I love these posters because you know, it shows what the community is starting to look like, and you know, everybody looks different, but what about their similarities? Like, why don't we focus on those instead? Let's find the strengths in the differences and the similarities. Now, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to suspect that our veteran up here, Glenn, probably has some stories about how this hasn't always been the case in the mainframe industry, right? And things have evolved over time and I've just come in at the tail end of it, right? And so I'm getting the good parts. And so maybe Glenn can introduce himself and share a little bit of his stories.
Thank you. Hi everybody, I'm Len Santalucia, and I'm the CTO of Vicom Infinity. We are a converged company. The company started in the early 90s when I was still working at IBM, and the owner of the company is a fellow by the name of Tom Amodio, local New York boy like me. And we hung out with each other and went to customer calls, and over time the company grew to what it is today. When I retired from IBM after 32 years, I came to work for Vicom Infinity, thinking it was only going to be just about another 4 or 5 more years. But before I knew it, another 15 went by, and I'm still here. And this month, I'm actually celebrating my 50th year, 1973 to 2023. It's just flown right by. People ask me when I'm going to retire, right, Bob? And I don't know yet. Still trying to figure out what do I want to do when I grow up, I guess. You know, you get to see a lot of things over 50 years, folks. And one of the things that I happened to had an opportunity to see is I grew up in a town called Endicott, New York. Anybody ever heard of that place? Endicott, New York is the home of IBM. And that's where it started and incorporated in 1924. And what I did is I stayed there for the first 50 years of my life, eventually moving to New York after getting involved with Wall Street customers. And said, the kids grew up, we were done driving a Mercedes off a cliff every year because their tuitions are all done. Well, let's go continue doing that and get an apartment in New York. Because just like driving a Mercedes off a cliff, they're very expensive, anybody knows that lives in New York. And, you know, a lot of family through IBM. And there's one thing about growing up as an Italian family. I am the firstborn in the United States. All my family is from Italy. I am 100% Italiano. And when you have Italian grandparents, there's a lot of things you learn from them. Okay? And one of the things we learned as kids, I'm the oldest of all the kids, is that your grandparents have very subtle messages for you. And one of them, in my particular situation, was you think the grandfather is the head of the family. No. The grandmother is the head of the family. And the grandfather agrees because he knows what he better agree, but he wants to agree, right? And so my two grandmothers were very good at teaching us about tolerating all kinds of people. We grew up pretty poor, you know, we didn't have any money. And we didn't know any better, but we had a roof over our head and always had great food, and a stick ball and a ball, and a couple in the street to play with, out in the middle of the street. And I'll tell you, when I hung around both my grandmothers, you learned how to live with and understand how to work with women. You really did. And it was actually fun. In fact, I'd rather do that than hanging around with the guys. And you know, how to respect them, how to take care of them, how to work with them, all those kinds of things. So, fast forward, I get this job at IBM. And IBM was pretty good, I have to say, at also taking care of women and diversity at the time. But one of the things that I learned with my grandma is that, you know, carrying that kind of mentality into the workplace was a pretty interesting thing for me to do, because a lot of the guys that I worked with didn't think that way. But I would say to some of my lady colleagues, hey, come on with me, I'm going to a meeting, I want you to follow me into the meeting. And listen, tell me what you think, and, you know, make your any contribution they can make. That's why I would ask them. And it was fantastic. And I was just doing it like my grandmother did. And you know, see some of the looks I got sometimes from my male colleagues, but I didn't care. I didn't understand it. I didn't want to understand the way they thought. I wanted to do it the way I grew up with, and it really, really made a difference as far as I'm concerned. And there was actually a lady colleague actually came up to me one time and said, do you mind if I come with you to a meeting? You know, other guys don't see. I said, what do you mean with the other guys that want you? I said, now that you said that, you are coming to the meeting with me. I said, well, are you sure? Yes, I am sure. You've come to the meeting with me. And you want to be on the board with me? You want to be a co-manager with me or something like that? You can, because she did. And it worked out fantastic. And I really believe in that mode of operation, and I always will. And I continue to do so. And one thing about our Mainframe community that's really wonderful as far as I'm concerned, you know, it's like a cult more than anything, really, right? You guys are laughing, you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. You know, we take care of each other, right? And, you know, you ever hear the Italians say La Familia? That's family, you can pick out from that word, right? We are a family. And when you come up against us, we're pretty powerful together more than we are as individuals, right? And if you add a few of these characters into the picture, we're even more powerful, right? You agree with me? Everybody? You better agree with me. All right, I'm just kidding. So, and now we have somebody standing right next to me, Sudharsana, who is very good at this advocacy stuff, and we wanted to give her a chance to say a few things here as part of this panel. So,
awesome. Thank you, Len. All right, my name is Srinivasan. I work for IBM as an IBM Z advocacy manager. Basically, I get paid to have fun. Oops, did I say that out loud? Meredith, you didn't hear that. I work with our global community every single day. That's what I wake up, that's what I do, that's what I really enjoy. And these banners we're seeing here today is that pure labor of love, right? Trying to showcase this diverse community that is our Mainframe community. So if I just take a step back for a moment here, and when I got started with IBM, I started as an IBM Mainframe, IBM Z firmware developer. And a lot of the meetings I would attend would be a room full of men, no women really at the table, let alone a South Asian woman at the table. So here I'm talking diversity in truly all different forms of diversity, right? There is ethnic diversity, cultural diversity. That said, diversity doesn't stand alone. In my mind, and I hope you all agree, diversity goes hand in hand with inclusion, right? What I really recognized is while I went to that table and doubted if I belonged at the table, that was more of a me projecting how I felt, you know, sort of that imposter syndrome. But what I realized is the folks at the table were very inclusive. They were willing to share knowledge. They were ready to share knowledge if I mustered the courage to actually go and ask them a question. And that struck me, right? And that was my way of sort of bringing myself into this Mainframe community. What I will say though, is back when I started, even if it was just 15 years ago, as a firmware developer, we did not have a lot of the resources we have today. Here we are today, Open Mainframe Summit. We're talking about this, you know, mainframe community. Open Mainframe project brings so many of our contributors, so many of our projects together. And I already said, I work on IBM Z and Linux One community. That's my bread and butter day job, right? So that community there, and specifically I want to call out our new to IBM Z user group, is really where we are bringing all of our young mainframers together to be able to share, to engage, and to grow, really bringing that sense of belonging, right? So I think all of these go so well together, diversity and inclusion, and finally, feeling that sense of belonging. I think that is so important, and that is what I really enjoy about the mainframe community, is everyone has that sense of belonging, and we do go out of our way, and I know that because I see our advocates working out there in the community every single day to ensure that. And here we have today today's architects, right? All of these, you know, amazing mainframers. They are here, and this is our journey. I mean, we've come a long way, and we have a long way to go for sure. But I just enjoy being part of this community here, and I do think, you know, it is a diverse and even more so growing to be even more diverse and inclusive. With that, Louisa, I know I mentioned new to IBM Z, and you did say you are new to IBM Z.
Yeah.
How do you see it? And I shared my story when, you know, 15 years ago and not having as many resources, or at least the new to IBM Z person that I was then didn't realize or recognize it. How is it now for you as a new to IBM Z person in terms of feeling that sense of belonging and inclusion that I talked about?
So it's quite interesting because I joined Kix originally, so I'm part of the kind of Kix team in IBM and also Galassa. So I've had almost two completely different experiences of the kind of Z world. You've got the Kix traditional development, they're moving on to GitHub, it's really exciting kind of what they're doing in that area, but it's very established, the customers are there for a long time, and it's really quite a, you know, people have been there for a really long time in the kind of growing their expertise and their really deep skills in all sorts of areas. Whereas coming into the Open Mainframe project, I mean, Joe comes up and says, you know, we've got 5 years in Zoe, and that in comparison to a 55-year-old product is like two completely different ways of looking at the world. And I suppose from my perspective, I stood up, it must have been February time. I go to university 1 day a week for work, and I stood up and we had to do this pitch for a new product that we were creating. And at the time I thought, great, I can use Galassa as a way to frame this. And so I kind of stood up and I explained to these university students, and I'm doing business degree, I was like, this is what the mainframe is, this is, I did a big picture, and they all kind of looked at me a bit blankly. And I said, okay, so if you tap your, you know, I did the classic, you tap your bank card, this is how your transactions run through. And then they all kind of nodded and went, yes, I understand. And I think I've come in at a kind of slightly different stage to all of these guys, probably more closer to you, Donna, in your experience. because, you know, I would be in rooms, especially in my previous roles, where it was all men. I worked on acquisitions, and they were founders, and you know, it was quite daunting as a kind of young woman to stand in those rooms and hold my own. Whereas in this community, just today I've met kind of 5 people that I didn't know before today. And so I guess one thing that I wanted to take away, and before I pass one more time back to these guys, I'd like to challenge everyone in the room that if you don't know someone today, especially in the room, maybe not in Tech Exchange generally, they might not all quite know the Mainframe as well as we do, but meet someone new that you haven't met before, and you all have a common language. You all know what KICS is, or IMS, or some of the kind of more detailed quirks of the Mainframe, shall we call it. And that would be my kind of closing comment to everyone else here, is just to meet someone different and be safe in the knowledge that we all have a common language, because that's how I feel coming into the room today. So I'm just going to go one more time. If you want to have anything that the audience should take away from today, what would that one thing be?
I would actually just add on to your challenge to everyone to change the way you write that narrative I referred to earlier, right? So she's absolutely right. Go out, meet new people, meet someone you haven't met before, and instead of looking at their differences and writing a negative narrative in your head, look for the similarities and looking for the positives in those differences, and change the narrative that you've been writing in your head about what those people can bring to your life, your career, and all of those things.
All right, so every Hollywood movie that has Las Vegas will always say, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. I'll challenge you to take this message of diversity and inclusion and advocacy and building that sense of belonging, which is the Mainframe community, way out of Vegas, out to the world. That's my challenge to you.
Whatever happens in Vegas, no. Message, do unto others as you would like them to do unto you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.